Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Eversole, the Executive Director of the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium, and I want to welcome you to our webinar series. We're very fortunate today to have Alice Dangui de Desert from INRAE and University of Clermont in Clermont-Auvergne in France. With us today to talk about the evolution of recombination landscapes in wheat and particular populations. So before we get started with that, I'd like to kind of give you just a quick overview of the IWGSC. We are a public-private consortium that has members in 71 countries, continuing to grow with our membership, a little over 3,300 at this point. We have 914 institutes and companies who are involved in some way in wheat work and are part of our consortium. We are fortunate to have 10 sponsors who make it possible for us to do our work, and that includes this webinar. So it allows us to have these webinars that occur about once a month. So since the IWGSC reference sequence was published in 2018, we have been focused on what we call IWGSC 2.0 or IWGSC version 2. And it, in a way, is a continuation of what our vision was in the beginning, which was to enhance breeding. But now we're focused on enhancing breeding through the increased understanding of the molecular basis of traits and their allelic diversity. And we can do that now because we have all these great genomic resources, those created by the IWGSC as well as many others in the community. So this year we have been focused on trying to increase our collaborations with genomic tool developers to make sure that the community has the kind of tools they need to really capitalize on those genomic resources that are out there. We're also publishing a clear process for contributing to how you as the community members can contribute to manual and functional annotation. We're continuing to try to secure completion and funding and completion of the reference sequence at platinum quality of at least 8 land races that represent the breadth of wheat diversity. And we are always trying to find ways that we can be for pre-publication release of genome sequences for elite varieties and other genomic resources. And of course, this webinar series. So our next webinar will be in April, and we will be fortunate to have someone from the John Innes Center with us, Azara Martin, who will talk about the PH1 ZIP4 story. So that should be a very interesting webinar, and I encourage you to register for that now. Just to remind you about the dashboard and to tell you that the webinar is recorded and will be posted on the IWGSC YouTube channel in a few days. You can subscribe to that channel so that you never miss an upload or miss one of our series. So the presentation section will be followed by a Q&A period. You can please submit your questions at any time in the Q&A panel. You can also be sure and monitor the chat panel to see messages from either me or Isabelle Cogan, our communications director, as she will put links to things that come up and important information regarding what's going on the screen. So the other thing that you can do already is you can download both this presentation of mine as well as the presentation from Alice Dangui de Desert already. So we're also fortunate, and we'll welcome at the end during the Q&A Bertrand Servin from INRA, as well as we hope Pierre Sodi from INRA. So INRAE, I should say. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alice. And Alice, thank you very much for being here today. And we look forward to your presentation on the evolution of recombination landscapes in diverging populations of breadwheat. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Alice Dangui-Desdésert. Thank you very much to the IWGAC for the invitation to talk about evolution of recombination landscape in diverging population of breadwheat. This work was realized with Sophie Boucher, Pierre Sourdil and Bertrand Servin from INRAE, and also partly funded by the private breeding company Florimond-Desprez. So today we are talking about yield, whose production is facing many challenges. Breadwheat should increase to meet the future demand, and this increase of yield should take place in the context of reduction of entrants and emerging stresses, partly due to climate change. One way to meet the future demand is varietal improvement, which consists in providing new varieties to farmers. Varietal improvement relies on genetic variants. In a breeding population, there is a distribution of genetic values for traits of interest, and breeders will select the best line to provide new varieties to farmers. These genetic values, this distribution, is the result of the diversity of allelic combination of individuals within the population. Here you have an example with 4 inbred individuals, genotyped at 2 genes coding for the trait of interest, and each gene has the specific effect for the trait of interest, each allele, I mean. So basically, here the genetic value of an individual is the sum of allele it contains. The diversity of allelic combination results first from mutation, which create new alleles, and then these alleles are reshuffled in the population through meiotic recombination. Meiotic recombination is a process that occurs during meiosis, the process that allows an individual to produce gametes and transmit its genetic content to the next generation. Here you have a simplified view of meiosis. All begin with a reproductive cell named meiocyte. In this presentation, we are going to consider that breadwheat is a functional diploid. So breadwheat has 21 pairs of homologous chromosomes. Within each pair, one chromosome is originating from the mother of the individual, and one chromosome is originating from the father. In the next step of meiosis, homologous chromosomes will pair and reciprocally exchange large segments of DNA, resulting in recombined chromosome. The point of exchange is named crossing over, or CO, in this presentation. In the next step of meiosis, one chromosome per homologous group will be sampled into 2 new cells, and finally, this double recombined chromosome will be cut into to form 4 haploid gametes, which are the future genetic content, half of the future genetic content of an individual. Recombination is a very important process in breeding, as it allows to accumulate desirable alleles in new varieties. Let's take a situation in which genes of interest are located on the same chromosome. Here, the only way to obtain a desirable recombination is to observe a crossing over within the interval between the 2 genes of interest. We can distinguish between the recombined gamete in frequency equal to R and the not recombined gamete in frequency equal 1 minus R. Here, the probability to obtain the desirable gamete is in frequency R divided by 2. We are interested in the recombination landscape, which is basically the repartition of crossover along the genome. So what is the variability of the recombination landscape in breadwheat? You can see this with the first picture, the top picture on the left, which is the recombination of breadwheat along the 3b chromosome. In X, you have the physical distance along the 3b chromosome. In Y, you have the recombination rate, which is a proxy to the expected number of crossover per meiosis. You can see that this recombination landscape is strongly partitioned. Choulet and colleagues in 2014 defined 5 regions for each chromosome, which basically look the same. The 2 highly recombining distal regions R1, R3 in purple and red, the low recombining proximal region, R2A, R2B in green, and the centromeric region in which recombination is almost suppressed. If we compare recombination landscape with gene count per region, we can see that very few crossover occurred in gene-rich region. It means that crossover can be seen as a limiting factor for varietal improvement. And a very important question here is what drives recombination landscape, what drives crossover position, and what leverage can we have on this mechanism to improve efficiency of breeding? Recombination landscape is likely the result of many complex mechanisms, such as interference, for example, which prevents some type of crossover to step on the toes of each other, but also the local level of DNA compaction. The current paradigm is that there is a necessity to have a local decompacted DNA to allow meiotic protein to access to the DNA and perform crossover. So as recombination landscape is likely a complex mechanism, one approach to better understand its determinism and to characterize it is to look at variability between populations. Is there a variability? Is this variability genetically determined? And what drives this variability? So here you have two examples of two studies in plants. So on the left, you have Maran and colleagues 2019 studies on rice that compare recombination landscape of two rice subspecies, Oryza japonica and Oryza sativa indica. They concluded that 80% of recombination hotspots are subspecies specific, recombination hotspot being intervals in which crossover are very frequent. On the right, you have the result of Schwarzkopf and colleagues published in 2020, who compare recombination landscape of several cacao tree populations. And they concluded that most recombination hotspots are population specific. So overall, it seems in plants that there is a variability of recombination landscape. So what about the variability of recombination landscape in bred wheat? In my knowledge, there are two studies that focus on this topic. One was led by Gardiner and colleagues in 2019, who compare recombination landscape in 13 nested association mapping families. So basically, a MAM families is inbred progeny derived from the cross between one parent, which is common to every family, and one parent which is specific of the family. And by comparing the recombination landscape of the 13 parents, they concluded that more similar parents, from a genetically point of view, have more similar recombination landscape. On the right, you have the study of Darrier and colleagues in 2017. They estimated and compared recombination landscape of an Asian population of bred wheat in blue, a European population of bred wheat in red, and a recombination landscape of progenies derived from the cross between two varieties, Channing Spring and Renan, in green. And they concluded that recombination landscapes were pretty much similar between populations. However, they analyzed a region spanning less than 4 megabases. So in conclusion, it was not very well known, the variability of recombination landscape in bred wheat was not very well known, and this was the aim of our work, to estimate and compare genome-wide recombination landscapes between diverging populations of bred wheat. So let's go for method. In the first place, we needed to estimate a recombination landscape. The most classical method consists in counting recombination within segregating families. In my next slide, this method will be called meiotic landscape. For example, this was done in the inbred progeny derived from the cross between the varieties Chinese Spring and Renan. And by comparing chromosome of progenies, genotyped chromosome of progenies and genotyped chromosome of parents, we can deduce the proportion of recombining gametes and so the recombination rate. The drawback of this classical approach is that recombination rates are estimated on very few progeny. Indeed, it is expensive to grow and genotype all these progeny. Moreover, the obtained recombination landscape can be specific of parents. We know in bred wheat that structural variations are frequent, and we know that structural variations are locally upsetting the recombination landscape. So if one parent carries one structural variation, its recombination landscape will be very specific to this parent at this position. The alternative method is to estimate a recombination landscape using linkage disequilibrium patterns within a diversity panel. A diversity panel being a collection of accession or basically a population. This method is called LD-based landscape. On the left, you have a LD patterns matrix. In X, you have SNP ID along a segment of chromosome. In Y, you have the same SNP ID. Each case gives a correlation between allele at SNP1 and allele at SNP2. Linkage disequilibrium is basically the degree of association between allele at two SNPs. So the higher the correlation, the higher the LD. We are going to exploit the relationship between LD and recombination. We know that recombination breaks allelic association. So basically, when LD is high, it means that recombination occurs scarcely in the past of the population. And when LD is low, it means that recombination occurred frequently in the past of the population. So just on this matrix, you can see the variation of the recombination landscape. You have two dark squares in which recombination occurred scarcely in the past of the population, separated by a clear zone, meaning that recombination occurred frequently in the past of the population between the two squares. We can convert these LD patterns to LD-based recombination rates using the Lee-Stephens model, which estimates the quantity ρ, the LD-based recombination rate, equal K, a numeric value which depends on the effective population size NE, multiplied by the per generation recombination rate C. And so you can see on the right the variation of the LD-based recombination rate. And as expected, the interval in which we suspected recombination to be frequent in the past of the population correspond actually to a peak of recombination. This approach provides many advantages compared to the classical meiotic method. Recombination rates are estimated on many meioses because LD patterns are derived from many meioses in the population. Moreover, usually in a diversity panel, there is more polymorphic SNP than in a biparental cross. So basically, with these two elements, we are able to obtain finest variation of recombination landscape along the genome. Moreover, this LD approach is less sensitive to individual specific variation because many reproductors contributed to the population. So it's more representative of the population. So this approach is better suited to compare recombination landscapes between populations. So what are our populations? We had 4 different populations of bread wheat. They were made of 371 bread wheat landraces sampled worldwide, genotyped of 130,000 SNP. Based on genetic data, we made 4 groups, and we named these groups after the main geographical origin of their members. So, for example, on the map, you have in red the Western European population, in orange the Eastern European population, in green the Western Asia population, and in blue the Eastern Asia population. This differentiation shows a gradient of differentiation. I mean that populations that are geographically closer are also genetically closer. You can see this with the 3 on the right, where you can see, for example, that the Eastern Asia population is a very differentiated population. Below, you have an admixture graph showing once more this progressive pattern of differentiation. And we remove too much admixed land races in order to give to our population a own genetic identity. So the question here is, do the recombination profiles of these 4 populations vary? We estimated their recombination landscape. For each population, we split the genome into 600 windows of around 2 centimorgan length using the classical Chinese spring-runner genetic map. And then we run software from Lee-Stephens named FAS to obtain estimate of the LD-based recombination rate ρ and the LD-based recombination inflation lambda. So on the right, you have an illustration showing ρ and lambda. Rho can be also called the background recombination rate and is estimated for a windows of several SNP. And lambda is the local inflation of recombination and is estimated for each interval. Let's go for results. In the first place, we wanted to validate our LD-based recombination landscape on the well-known Chinese spring Renan recombination landscape. So on the right, you can see Chinese spring Renan recombination landscape. On the left and on the right, you can see the recombination landscape of the 4 population for the 3B chromosome. In both approaches, you can see that the distal regions R1 and R3 are highly recombining. The 2 pericentromeric regions R2A, R2B in green are poorly recombining, and the centromere is almost depleted of recombination. So overall, patterns of recombination are conserved between these 2 approaches. We then perform correlation between these 2 approaches. This is the graph on the right. On the top left, you have the correlation, the genome-wide correlation. But you can see here the trick. In both approaches, telomeres are highly recombining, while centromeres are poorly recombining. This strengthens the correlation to almost up to 1. This is a clue that we need to perform correlation within each region, or even better, within each genomic regions. So I mean 1A-R1 to Z-D-R3. In average, the correlation between meiotic and LD-based approaches were equal to 0.6 with the standard deviation 0.2. There were very intense local differences between meiotic and LD-based landscapes, especially for the low, especially we saw a low correlation in the Z-D-R3 regions. You have the recombination landscape for this region on the right. On the top, this is for Chinese spring Renan. Below, this is for the Western Europe population. You can see at the tail of this region that recombination is suppressed in Chinese spring Renan. In fact, at this position, the Renan parent carries a wide introgression, basically a structural variation, that locally prevents crossover formation. But this is not the case in the Western European population, where we can still appreciate variation of recombination. So this is a clue that meiotic landscapes are sensitive to individual specific variation, and that LD-based approach is less sensitive to individual specific variation. So in conclusion, about the validation of LD-based recombination landscape, we saw a good correlation between LD-based and meiotic landscape, but we had a higher resolution in LD-based landscape. I mean, we had finest variation along the genome. So this approach was better suited to study and compare fine-scale variation of recombination between the 4 populations. If we are interested in the comparison of fine-scale variation of LD-based landscape between populations, we have a little bit problem with this approach. In fact, the LD-based recombination rate, rho, and its estimate, rho hat, are sensible to evolutionary forces through the value of K, which depend on the effective size of the population. Basically, a variation of rho along the genome or between populations can either be attributed to a variation of recombination or a variation of the effective population size. For example, selection is an evolutionary force that can locally decrease the effective population size. In a selective sweeps, one haplotype's rise in frequency in the population and the population size is locally decreasing. So to remove the impact of evolutionary forces on the variation, we, instead of using the parameter rho, we used the parameter lambda, which is the ratio between the recombination within the interval of 2 SNP divided by the interval, divided by the recombination within estimated in a larger windows of 2 centimorgans. And we are going to make the hypothesis that evolutionary forces acted the same way in the interval and in the larger windows. By removing the K values in the equation, we can say that lambda is an indicator of the local inflation of recombination. And if you look at the graph on the right, you can see that the peak of recombination is associated to a lambda value of 49. It means that the recombination rate within this specific interval is 49 times higher than the background recombination in the window. So as a lambda landscape along the genome show variation of recombination only, it is better suited to compare population. In the first place, we wanted to localize intervals showing high recombination rate. we defined highly recombining intervals, which were basically intervals showing high lambda values. On the right, you have the distribution of lambda value for all genome and all population. We set an arbitrary threshold to lambda equal to 4, and intervals showing a value of lambda superior to 4 were claimed highly recombining intervals. We looked at features associated with these intervals. In fact, we detected 9,000 highly recombining intervals, all population combined. Most of them were located in highly recombining regions R1 and R3, and most of them overlapped genes. You can see this on the graph on the right. In X, you have intervals located in intergenic regions or in genic region. In Y, you have the 5 main regions, but also the percentage of intervals overlapping either intergenic region or genic regions for each of the region. Well, you can see that 80% of highly recombining intervals overlap genes, which is much more than not specific interval. So in conclusion, how highly recombining intervals were associated with open chromatin features, which is consistent with literature on recombination hotspot. We then look at conservation of these intervals across the 4 populations. You have 4 panels. The first panel gives the proportion of intervals which are population specific, so 66% in our study. The second panel shows that 34% of intervals were shared by 2 populations or more. Then 12% of intervals were shared by 3 populations or more. And finally, 2% of intervals were shared by the 4 populations. In gray, you have the expected proportion of intervals shared by chance. And as you can see, the point is systematically significant compared to the expected proportion by chance. So the first panel teaches that there is less population-specific intervals than expected, and the second panel teaches that there is more shared intervals than expected. So basically, it means that there is a common mechanism driving the position of these intervals, but this mechanism shows differentiation between populations. We then look at the increase of recombination at population-specific highly recombining intervals. And this graph shows you that populations that are genetically closer have an increase of recombination under Asheri at the same position, basically, an increase of recombination at the same position. The problem by studying highly recombining intervals is that we need to set a threshold. In order to compare genome-wide variability of recombination landscape, we did not define a threshold and studied all intervals. So for each genomic region and each pairs of population. In the first place, we compute the FST value, which is a measure of genetic differentiation. The higher the FST, the more differentiated are the population. Then we compute an indicator of the similarity of the recombination landscape, basically the correlation of recombination inflation along the genomic region. So you have a little example below. In X, you have lambda values in the Western European population, so for each interval, and in Y, you have the lambda values for the Eastern European population, and here the correlation is equal to 0.58. So for each pairs of population, we add the FST and the correlation of lambda, which give us 6 data points. And by drawing these data points, we are able also to draw a regression line. And here the slope of the regression line is negative. It means that more differentiated population show a less similar profile. We did this analysis for all genomic regions. You can see this with picture on the left. On the right, you have a summary of slope value. In X, the value of the slope, also named FST effect. In Y, you have the genomic region. Each point is the value of a slope, and the gray bar gives the confidence interval. If the confidence interval does not overlap the value 0, we say that the value of the slope is significantly different from 0, and the point is marked in red. So as you can see, most slopes are negative and most slopes are significantly different from zero. It means that overall, the FST has a negative effect on the similarity of recombination landscape. In other words, similarity of recombination landscape decrease with genetic differentiation. In conclusion, our conclusion is that recombination landscapes evolved quickly in breadwheat. We saw that genetic divergence was associated with an increased differentiation of LD patterns. We converted these LD patterns to LD-based recombination rates among the highest resolutive recombination landscape published in breadwheat. The signal of differentiation was very clear, and the signal was likely not biased by evolutionary forces. Moreover, such differentiation pattern of recombination was also observed in other plant studies, such as breadwheat, rice, and cacao, and some other datasets can hint such differentiation patterns such as maize, poplar, and cotton. So overall, it seems that in plants, there is an evolution of crossover repartition along the genome with evolutive history. So this discussion will focus on potential driver of CO evolution, of the evolution of CO repartition along the genome. Indeed, comparing population might provide some insight about the CO position determinism. So how to explain the variability between our four populations? The first suspect are environmental effects. It has been demonstrated in barley that temperature can modify recombination landscape. However, in our study, we do not really believe that environmental effects are causing the variability of recombination landscape. Indeed, our four populations cover very wide area, and there is no reason that populations that are geographically closer share the same environmental effects, more similar environmental effects. The second possibility is the genomic variability between our population or an epigenomic variability. Maybe the DNA sequence between our four populations has evolved. Maybe the chromatin landscape has evolved also. We know that local DNA compaction is an important factor to allow formation of crossover. So basically, the status of compaction, decompaction of the DNA along the genome might have changed between our four populations. The last suspect is the existence of genes driving crossover position. In few mammals, it has been demonstrated that the PRDM9 protein is determining the crossover position. The PRDM9 protein scans the DNA looking for specific sequence of nucleotide. Nearby this sequence, the protein deposes an epigenetic marks that catalyze the formation of crossover. The PRDM9 protein does not exist in plants, but maybe similar mechanism exists. So to go further on the question, we can, in the first place, use sequence data to detect recombination hotspots. In our study, we were not able to detect recombination hotspots that span less than 5 kilobase according literature, and we didn't have this SNP density. And then look at enrichment in terms of functional annotation or chromatin marks at this hotspot, and maybe compare population. Another possibility would be to perform a genome-wide association analysis in segregating families, looking for genes driving the crossover position. So thank you very much for your attention. You can find all the methodologies and results in the article published in Genome Biology and Evolution. And thank you very much to the co-author, Sophie Boucher, Bertrand Savin, and Pierre Sourdil, but also the laboratories that supported this work and our founder, Florimond Després. Your questions are welcome.
Thank you very much, Alice. At this point, we are going to be joined by Bertrand Savin and Pierre Sourdil. Pierre, I think you'll just need to turn your camera on and you will show it.
Can you see me?
Yes.
That's me.
Might lower your camera just a little because we're only getting part of your face. And while Pierre is adjusting his camera, thank you for a very good presentation, Alice. Well put together. And just want to point out that this work was partially funded by Florimond Desprez which is a sponsor of the IWGSC, and of course INRA-E is a sponsor as well. And Pierre Sordi is one of our board members. So, are you ready, Pierre?
Yes, so what do I have to say?
Okay, so if you could, I think your camera, can you lower your camera? So, because we're only getting part of your face. And it's a nice part, I will admit, but you can get the whole thing.
Pierre, faudrait que tu baisses ta caméra pour qu'on voit ton visage bien, parce que là, on voit que tes yeux, en fait.
Ah, there you are, perfect.
That's fine.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us. All right, so just to remind the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A panel and we will get to them. So the first question that has come in is, in a panel population, how do you decide which is the parental allelic combination and the recombinant allelic combination? Okay.
Sorry, I did not understand very well the question. Can you repeat?
Yes. So how do you decide which is the, I don't know if I got echo on my end.
A little bit.
Okay, so let's try again. In a panel population, how do you decide which is the parental allelic combination and the recombinant allelic combination?
I think that LD patterns does not require to set such information. Basically, LD is a degree of association of allele, whatever their origin. And basically, the underlying hypothesis, do I have echo? Is it okay? The underlying hypothesis is that there is ancient haplotypes that were breaks by recombination. And when recombination is very frequent, was very frequent in the history, LD decreased. And when recombination was rare, LD is maintained, kind of. So there is no really a need to set parental alleles.
Okay, so the next question is, how do you plan to test what factors drive the differences in recombination landscapes between populations?
Well, it's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
So I suggested two possibilities. The first one will be to perform a genome-wide association analysis. So basically, you can cross Asian and European line, you know, the most differentiated one for the recombination landscape, and then perform a GWAS to detect genes. For each breeder, each reproductor, estimate its recombination landscape and then find the genes associated with the position of crossover of recombination hotspots. So this is the first possibility. The second is more like a correlation analysis, looking at enrichment within a hotspot, which type of chromatin marks are present in hotspot, and maybe perform also some GMOs, looking at maybe if we add some marks or modify the local sequence, what happened. Maybe these are possibilities to go further on the question.
Pierre or Bertrand, do you want to add anything? No.
Pierre, maybe.
Ah, yes, you.
So what has been done by Katie Jordan in the lab of Ed, I think it could be a good strategy to find some genes that may be involved in the high recombination rates.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe add that usually the phenotype that is more easily accessed is the intensity of recombination, how many crossovers happen in one meiosis. Recombination landscapes phenotypes are much more complicated because they require, it's to some extent to estimate a genetic map for one parent, right? And if you want to do a GWAS, then you need to do that for many individuals. So that's usually pretty expensive, or you have to be either very rich or very clever. So.
All right. The next question is there any evidence in your data or data from other groups that the recombination hotspots could actually move on the chromosome during evolution?
Well, I think we believe this is what happened. I guess this is the sense of this evolutive approach. At the beginning, we can say that there were an original population having one recombination landscape, and with time, the driver of recombination landscape evolved and the hotspots moved. But we don't have any real clue to, I mean, except our results showing variability of recombination landscape. I don't know, we don't have any molecular clue to go further on this question. Maybe such as GC content or.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know if the questions were specific to wheat. I mean, it's been shown in other species, yes, in mammals, yes, in hominids, but I don't know in bread wheat.
All right. So based on what you've done so far, what is your advice for actually implementing these results to improve soft wheat?
Implementing this result into what? Sorry.
Into a breeding program. How would you implement it in a breeding program?
Well, in fact, recombination is important to accumulate desirable alleles. So basically, we show that recombination landscape were kind of population specific. So maybe breeders could use our Western European population landscape, I mean for Western European breeders, but well, each breeder, considering the origin of the germplasm, we could use a suitable recombination landscape. One question is, we show that there is variability, and one question is how big is this variability and is it significant at a breeding point of view? I'm not sure the answer is very clear. Indeed, there is variability, but I did a PhD and other work on my PhD shows that there is very few incidents of this variability on breeding. Basically, you can change for one recombination landscape or another. It does not change much the result of genetic gain.
Pierre or Bertrand, do you want to add anything to that?
I would say the landscape itself is important, like the fact that you have like increased recombination at the extremities and have this characterized nicely. But the differences between population is small and too small to be important for having practical consequences in terms of breeding.
All right. So I'm interested in the fact that you took Francois Belfourier's populations that he had done as part of the breed wheat project, and you grouped those into 4 populations. Did you see significance? And I know you mentioned once with the European versus the Asian, but do you see tremendous significance between those 2 populations? And could that have, and particularly when we look at, again, reminding me of Francois's paper, that we don't have a lot of the Asian germplasm in the elite lines in European elite lines. Is there a significance there in our understanding of recombination with regards to our elite lines? I mean, does it? I know it's a very convoluted question, but the bottom line really is because of the divergence between the Asian pool and the European pool, and the fact that most of the breeding companies are relying on the European pool, more so than on the East Asian pool, certainly. Is there recombination difference significance in those? No? Okay.
Indeed, this is significant from a statistically point of view, but is this significant for breeding? I'm not sure. There is differences. I don't remember how much, for example, highly recommending intervals are shared between the Western Asia population, Western European population and the Eastern Asia population. I would say like this, less than 10% of hotspots are shared, so this is very few. However, the overall recombination landscape is significantly different, but not much different.
Okay. All right. So that's good to know. So it doesn't really have that much of an impact then. All right. The next question is, the increase or decrease in recombination is usually limited to the euchromatic portions of the genome. How can we increase recombination in paracentromeric regions where many of the genes of breeding importance are hidden? Are known genes to manipulate available to increase recombination in those regions?
This is a very interesting question. For sure, if local DNA is too much compacted as heterochromatin in centromere, it will be complicated to force a crossing over at this position. Maybe some other biological engineering are needed to unlock heterochromatin at this position. Maybe Pierre has an opinion on the subject.
Yes, so there are many genes that are known to improve recombination in models, like FONCM, RECQ4, and so on. Sorry. Okay, and so all these genes, when they are mutated, are increasing recombination, but always in the same regions. So where recombination already occurs. So there is a great debate whether we will be able to increase recombination in the pericentromeric regions using these genes. After that, so there are other strategies, but using different mutants.
So do you see the possibility of engineering with CRISPR, for example, as something that should be considered?
Yes, so this can be a strategy, but we have to decide what genes we will have to edit.
Yeah. And that we don't know yet.
And there are some good candidates to improve recombination, but for the moving recombination toward the pericentromeric regions, it is more difficult.
Okay, so let's kind of continue on this. Do crossability genes, example the KRs, have anything to do with recombination hotspots or recombination frequency?
Sorry, which gene can you?
So to my knowledge, the genes that are involved in crossability does not affect the recombination rate, to my knowledge.
Okay, I think that is the question. Is there any impact?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. So when you, in your discussion slide, in how you explain such variability, Alice, you mentioned environmental effects. This is an area of great concern to me, to see how we actually can improve things to meet different environmental needs. So what do you see as the future in that regard, and what kind of research would help us narrow that down?
Do you mean how to better understand the impact of environmental effects on the recombination landscape?
Yes, exactly.
In my knowledge, it has been temperature has been well studied in barley. Other environmental effects have been shown to have an effect on the number of crossover per meiosis, but we don't really know about the recombination landscape, which are two different phenotypes. So these environmental effects were like solar radiation, humidity. It was a study of Dresig and colleagues 2015. How to go further on the question? What was interesting is that in barley, it has been shown that increasing temperature can move recombination toward more pericentromeric regions. So maybe we can test other environmental effects to unlock recombination in pericentromeric regions by testing a varying range of environmental effects likely.
Yeah. Is in the barley study, and I'm not familiar with that, so I apologize for my ignorance in this area, but do they measure it by percentage or degree increase in temperature, or how did they? I'm just thinking in terms of climate change. I mean, obviously it was probably related to climate change that they were looking at it. Do we face the possibility that we'll see more crossover in the pericentromeric regions as temperatures rise?
Yes, I think it was demonstrated in barley.
Yeah.
Temperature increase.
In the meantime, you are reducing the fertility.
Yes.
Which is problematic.
Yeah, that is problematic. So why do you think that is? Because it's going into the pericentromeric?
No, I don't think so. So we have to think about why you reduce fertility by increasing temperature, but this is not because you have more crossovers in the pericentromeric regions. I don't think so.
So has, not just environmental effects or not just temperature, of course, they deal with soil, microbes, management practices, et cetera. Do you see an opportunity in that realm of trying to bring all of that together to try to understand recombination under these different kinds of scenarios? I know it's big, it's pushing, but as for those of you who know, I tend to like to push towards these, really large efforts where we actually do see, try to measure all of the environmental impacts on what's happening with the genetics. And in my kind of vision is, can we design specific kinds of wheat for specific environments that do take that into consideration? And of course, that's what breeders do all the time, is trying to accomplish that. So I'm just wondering how we can take this kind of knowledge and bring it into the breeding programs.
Yes, I understand. If we are able to better understand the determinism of recombination landscape, maybe it will be possible to, I don't know, with mutated lines or maybe CRISPR approaches to drive the recombination at the place we want. If we know that we want to gather in one line genes for drought stress tolerance and one gene for yield, we know we need to recombine here, and maybe by understanding the driving of crossover position, it will be possible.
Yeah, my feeling is that it's probably not one gene, but it's probably a combination of factors that is pushing it. Pierre Deveau actually put a note in and said that increasing recombination rate was also shown in sugar beet as well as in barley. And then He also mentioned that a couple of years ago, they heard that some chemicals could increase the frequency of recombination. Is that a potential opportunity?
The increase of recombination rates is not very easy to deal with in breeding, at least from what I know, because in the first place, not all recombination are desirable. And then, so far, I read the simulation studies in which authors artificially increased the recombination just by simulation. And they concluded that indeed, in the long term, there is more genetic gain. But this is because, I remember this is because an increased recombination allows to save more genetic diversity at each generation cycle. So, but maybe it's less efficient for the short-term genetic gain, I don't know.
As Pierre was mentioning, I think recombination is also something you don't want to tamper too much with because you could have fertility problems. and it's also, I mean, so I work in livestock, but I know that in those species, it's highly regulated. So you could have very strong, even genetic perturbation of recombination rate. But like variation between individuals, but on the average landscape doesn't change much actually. So to me, it means that there is some kind of like homeostasis in the meiosis because it's so important for fertility that it might be difficult to tamper with it at the very large, like make very big modifications the way it works. But maybe we'll find out how to do it.
Yeah. So we did have another question that came in. Have you found differences in the distribution of crossover or frequency between chromosomes belonging to the distinct wheat genomes?
So with the LD-based approach, we indeed observed that the recombination rate was lower on the D genome, which is totally expected and was already demonstrated on a classical genetic map. We also detected less highly recombinant intervals, likely because we also show that the level of diversity of the genomic of the diversity panel at a position is associated with the ability to detect recombination hotspot. It has also been demonstrated in other studies such as Dapper and Pizer 2018. So basically, I mean, we detected less recombination hotspot, but that's not, maybe we were not able to detect them, but they exist. Well, that was the main pattern. And the IAB genome was very similar about the average LD-based recombination rate or the number of recombination hotspots. I mean, highly recombinant intervals.
So now that you have done this, what's your next steps, and how do you take this research forward? And you talked a little bit about doing GWAS or trying to focus in on detecting hotspots, but what do you envision as the next part of your work? Or what are you working on right now, maybe is a better way of saying it. Yeah.
You mean personally or
personally?
Yeah. Right now I'm working on the optimization of mating plans in bred wheat breeding program. So basically, which parents should be crossed to maximize the genetic gain in next generation. Now with genomic prediction models, you are able to predict the genetic values of a progeny of a cross, and so you can rank the most promising crosses. And there is different strategy to rank them, and some works better in some situations than others. So I'm working on this subject that require a genetic map because indeed variability of progeny genotypes
Mhm.
depends on the genetic map.
All right. Well, Pierre or Bertrand, do you want to add anything? As to, I mean, you're working in livestock, Bertrand, so it's,
Yeah, so I still work on recombination, but I work in ruminants mostly now, so in sheep, goat, and cattle. And our questions are related to Alice's work, which is like, how does recombination evolve over phylogenetic timescales? And we do that by comparing populations within species and also across species recombination rates. And we're trying to understand how it evolves. And I believe this kind of study that we have done with Alice are not so difficult to reproduce. And I believe that if we can do that in more populations, maybe more species, specifically using maybe sequence data, if possible, like more dense data, we should maybe get more insight into what happened, like why does it evolve like this, like more than just this pattern that we show that it's pretty consistent, try to understand if we can find some functional aspects of it by looking at further data sets and trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. All right. Pierre, do you want to comment before we wrap up?
Yes, I just want to thank again Alice for the very good job she did, because she did a lot of analysis, in fact, that were not presented today. And this greatly helped in having very good results, very nice results. So I would like to thank again Alice for all the job she did. All right. And now she's going to move to a private company, and I must admit that I am very disappointed of that.
Oh, no, yeah, this is good. She's applying her.
She would have been a very good researcher for the public domain.
But now she will take what she's learned and put it into a breeding program and help change wheat improvement for the better. So I think that's great.
Yes, we will show that recombination is important for breeders.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you to those who have been with us today and posed the questions. As you know, it'll take a little while before it gets up on the video gets on the YouTube channel. And just want to again thank our sponsors and a shout out to Florimond Desprez, who helped fund this work, but also to our other sponsors, and particularly we have a number of them on our who participated in this session today. So, all right, well, thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you at the end of April, or perhaps in person at some point this year. So, thank you again, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day.